Israel holds its breath as our president, Isaac Herzog, weighs a pardon for Prime Minister Netanyahu, a move that could be seen as either healing a divided nation or shattering faith in the system of justice. But just as that decision nears, President Trump steps in, inviting Bibi to the White House. Is he sending a lifeline to the Prime Minister or a warning? Is Washington losing patience over Israel's action in Syria and in other places in the Middle East? What is going on? Stay tuned for Israel Undiplomatic. Shalom and welcome to another episode of Israel Undiplomatic. I'm Mark Regev and I'm here in Jerusalem at the studios of JNS, and in New York is Ruthie Blum. How are you today, Ruthie?
I'm pretty good. Looking forward to being in the studio next week, as usual, the normal situation for us. And we have a lot to discuss today because the whole world is talking about what you'd think they're talking about: internal Israeli politics, talking about President Herzog giving Prime Minister Netanyahu a pardon in his corruption trial.
Well, as you know, this is a request by the Prime Minister's lawyers to the President of the State of Israel. And for our viewers and listeners abroad, they should understand the Israeli president is largely a ceremonial president. He doesn't have the power of the American or the French president. He's sort of a ceremonial head of state. But he does have, according to our constitutional practice, he does have the power of the pardon. And usually that's done on recommendation, recommendation from the legal authorities, but he does have total freedom to act in this pardon, just as the American president does. And the fact that Netanyahu's lawyers have asked now for a pardon is very significant because it follows a month ago when President Trump was here in the Knesset and he said specifically, Mr. President, why don't you give this man, and he pointed to Netanyahu, a pardon? And I even remember he joked about it. He said the charges against, I'm paraphrasing the president. He said the charges against the prime minister are frivolous. He said it's cigars, champagne, it's not serious. He said Netanyahu is a great war leader. Why would you let cigars and champagne, gifts, yes, that's what he's accused of, amongst other things, of receiving, yes. Why would you let that interrupt this great leader in Trump's perspective? Why do we let that upset his rule? And so it started with a Trump statement. It was followed up by an official letter from the president to the Israeli president. And then now Netanyahu's lawyers have got into the game, also asking for the pardon. And there's a lot of chatter in Israel. Everyone's got an opinion on this. But one of the interesting things I heard, and I don't know if it's true, of course, but it was said and it made me think, is that Netanyahu wouldn't have instructed his lawyers to act the way they had unless there was an indication that the president's office was at least open to this idea. What do you think about that, Ruthie?
Well, I'll tell you something. It's not just that. First of all, he wouldn't have requested a pardon if President Trump hadn't said, look, we've got a lot of business in the Middle East, and you're having to sit 3 times a week in court for these bogus charges, which they are, Mark, by the way. They're the most ridiculous charges ever. And it's been years that Netanyahu's been dragged through the legal system just in order to get him to leave politics. And that brings us to today. There are many people in Israel in the opposition who support this pardon if it has strings attached, the strings being that he exit politics. In other words, they don't really believe he's guilty of any of these charges, because if they did, leaving politics on his part wouldn't be an excuse to drop the charges, right? Now, I'm totally against this pardon because a pardon means that you're guilty of something. And I don't believe he's guilty of something. And not only that, there's something worse going on here. While he's not guilty of something, the legal system is guilty of something, and we're seeing it come out in court daily now. Not only the corruption of the legal system, which, by the way, prior to the October 7th war, the government was trying to reform the judicial system and the legal system. We have a deep state that is so floating to the top that it's not even deep anymore. And what's coming out in the trial are these horrific methods of trying to pressure witnesses to testify against Netanyahu. And they're coming out and saying horrible things about how they were pressured, and also that even when they had nothing to say. Now, I'm against his getting this pardon, even though he may want it, because right now is the worst time when we're actually seeing the horrible things that the judicial system is putting him through. Now is not the time to do that. What the time is, as Netanyahu has said again and again, the time is for him to prove his innocence. Now, what we also know is that because the courts dragged him, and the police dragged him through this process for so many years, and it's cost so much money, there's no way they're going to acquit him of all the charges, because they would look so foolish, wasteful, and they would show themselves to be the corrupt body that they are. So some of Netanyahu's supporters are saying the following. They're saying it's better that he get this pardon because there's no way he's going to be acquitted, certainly not of every single charge. And number two, he really does need to run the country, and sitting in the courthouse for this witch hunt is ridiculous, while he's run the war the whole time, and now he's trying to negotiate peace. I don't like that word, but he's negotiated some kind of deals with the surrounding countries.
So I want to respond to a few things you said, some of which I agree with, some of which I disagree with. The first thing you said quite correctly, that the leaders of the opposition, Yair Lapid, who heads Yesh Atid, Yair Golan, who heads this new leftist party called the Demokratim, the Democrats, the Israeli Democrats, they've said the president should only give the condition if Netanyahu admits his guilt. Two, that Netanyahu expresses contrition, remorse, apologizes, and three, that he resigns from all public office. And the truth is, had Netanyahu wanted to agree to that, he could have agreed to it a year ago, 2 years ago, because that's exactly what they asked, to do a plea bargain. In other words, he doesn't need to get this pardon. He doesn't need to do all that. He could just go, and that was on the table years ago already, and has been on the table the whole time, that if he just wanted to accept those conditions and resign and leave public office, they would drop all charges, there'd be a plea bargain, and it'd be over with. And that's been, as you said, a lot of the people, the trial, Trump talked about political trials against him in the United States. Political-based trials, the weaponization of the legal system for political purposes. Netanyahu and his followers surely believe that's true about this trial against him in Israel. And so the question has to be asked, why would Netanyahu even think of going down a pardon route if he could have, under the same conditions that the opposition is saying, he could have done it years ago, or he could have got a plea bargain and done very well. So that's clearly a non-starter. It's just not serious. You raised the issues of the problems with the indictments and the way the prosecution did their case. And you're 100% correct. And I want to add something. You talked about the witnesses who were put under illegal pressure, yes, that they were the way they were treated and how suspects were forced to become witnesses of state and so forth. And there's all these question marks. One of them is actually, I believe, suing the state attorney's office, accusing them of mistreatment and so forth. But there's another issue which needs to be said. One of the police officers who ran the investigation actually spoke out in the trial how they were acting in disregard of the Attorney General's guidelines. When the Attorney General gave the authority to do the investigation of the Prime Minister, so he placed very strict guidelines on what were the parameters of the case and what could be asked and what couldn't be asked, and they were ignored. They were ignored by the prosecutors. And so one has to ask what's going on here. So it's not just a matter of putting undue pressure on witnesses, but it's also a matter of not doing the investigation according to the guidelines that the Attorney General himself at the time had laid out. I would finish, though, with the following point. You talked about, and I understand a lot of Netanyahu base really believes that Netanyahu should continue with the trial, prove his innocence, and actually they should turn it upside down. In other words, they should call the former attorney general, they should call the former state prosecutor, the people who launched these charges against Netanyahu. They should stand trial. In other words, as part of the defense strategy, they should be fought before the stand and be asked all the difficult questions. And I can understand that because they really believe an injustice has occurred against the elected Prime Minister of the State of Israel. They believe, as Netanyahu believes, that they have been using legal means to destroy him politically. They couldn't defeat him in the ballot box, and so they're now, using legal means to try to get rid of him. And I understand the logic of their arguments, but I want to say the following. First of all, the trial could go on for years. Let's be clear. No one thinks this is going to end tomorrow, and when this trial is over, you will have appeals to the Supreme Court of Israel. It could go on and on and on. It could go on for up to a decade without any resolution, right? This will be an ongoing saga in Israeli political life, and you have to ask if that's good for the country. You also have to ask, will Netanyahu ultimately get justice? Because as you said correctly, there are so many charges against them, they'll find something that'll stick, right? And the judges have already said they've asked the prosecution, which has refused to do so, but they've asked the prosecution to take out corruption. They said there's no evidence of any corruption. They want to get him on a minor charge. So it's clear, though the prosecution has not agreed to the judge's request to get rid of the corruption charge, there are still, he won't be found guilty of that, obviously, from what the judges have indicated. But it is quite possible they'll get him on one of the minor things, because minor charges, they're so amorphous, they can stick on almost everyone. And they'll find something to stick him on. And then you lose the perspective. Because he received gifts of cigars and champagne, that's a reason to end his career. I think, my personal opinion, is all these facts are in front of the Israeli voters. Let the Israeli public decide in the elections that we'll have in the coming year. And let the people choose if cigars and, to quote President Trump, yes, if cigars and champagne is a reason for this man not to be the prime minister anymore.
Right, and it's not just cigars and champagne. Here's the point. The point is that when you say the charges are amorphous and something will stick, it's because the judges are also, they just decide what they want to. You realize that we have the most right-wing government, in Israel's history, etc. And yet, Netanyahu and the government has allowed the attorney general, who was fired, to say, no, sorry, not leaving my job. The same thing, we had this with the head of the Shin Bet. We had it with his former defense minister. Any move that Netanyahu and the government tried to make, the so-called deep state said, no, sorry, nothing doing. Okay, now, people who accuse Netanyahu of being some kind of dictator, it's pretty funny given the fact that he's unable to get anything done other than the most important things, and that's fighting our external enemies. But internally, he caves so much. And I think that his supporters, including myself, we get very disappointed that finally we have a government that could reform this legal system and other systems, the whole deep state system. And he caved. And this time it looks like he's doing it again. Now, in fairness to him, if his lawyers are advising him that, it's better that he do this now and get this whole trial out of the way so he can really focus on the important matters of state, I understand it, especially if President Trump is pressuring him and saying, listen, we got a lot of stuff to get done here. You can't be sitting in court 3 times a week. But the very fact that the court is demanding that he sit in court 3 times a week when he's running the country is outrageous in itself. Now, the other thing is, the other strings attached that his enemies would like to see is that moral turpitude be attached to the strings of this so-called pardon. And what would that mean? If moral turpitude is among the charges, or whatever you call it, I don't know if you call it a charge, but if moral turpitude is attached to it, that means he couldn't run again in politics. Not just that he'd have to step down now, but that his political career is finished. That's all they're interested in. That's all they've been interested in. And it's outrageous. If we allow this to happen, then what's to stop it from happening again and again? And, the right wing doesn't do that to the left wing. It's always the other way around. So, yes, I'm disappointed in this. And I was hoping he would, especially now when all the dirt is floating to the surface, that he would not request a pardon, but rather finish proving his innocence.
I think the trouble with that, Ruthie, is from Netanyahu's perspective and from the point of view of what's good for the state of Israel, you say he should finish the trial and prove his innocence, but that's a process that could take, as I said a moment ago, it could take more than a decade. And in any legal case, yes, people have to always make a choice. You think you're right, you want to go to court, but how long is it going to take? How much is it going to cost you? Are you going to get the result you want, right? And all these things I think Netanyahu has to consider. There used to be an ad in Israel for, Israelis were notoriously, I think they're better today, but they were historically notoriously bad drivers. And one of the ads for road safety on the television used to be, don't be right, be smart. In other words, because you have right of way, you go ahead and there's a car accident. Yeah, you've got to be smart. You've got to look at the road around you and you've got to give way sometimes, even if you think you're right. And so I think I'd say the same to Netanyahu and his legal team. Don't be right, be smart. Once again, when you say finish it, I don't think there is an option to finish this quickly. And therefore, it's either having an ongoing trial, as I say, up to a decade maybe. Yes, and Netanyahu is now, how old is Netanyahu now? He's born in 1949, which means he's now 76, right? He wants to deal with this for the rest of, next 10 years of his life until he's 86. And I think there's a personal decision here for him, but it's also a decision for the country. Now, you're right. The concern would be that if the trial ends, all the people who are involved in bringing him to trial are not going to be judged themselves, right? And I think a lot of people on the right want to see justice done to that system. The people who are behind the decision, as I said, the former attorney general, the former state prosecutor, people like that who started this whole process. And it comes on the back of, we've got all these problems now with the chief legal officer of the army, the JAG, and then with the current state government advisor, the current legal person. Yeah, and so we've got all these issues that are a problem in Israel. But I think best that these issues are solved through the ballot box. And I want to see legal reform in this government. I want to see legal reform in the country. I want to see legal reform go ahead. But I believe, Ruthie, because legal reform is ultimately constitutional reform, I'd like to see more broad-based support for legal reform. The way we elect our judges, the powers of the Attorney General, if the Attorney General should be divided up into authorities, because one famous Israeli jurist, Amnon Rubinstein, who was like one of the leaders of the Israeli left and a very big man on the rule of law, I think he once said that our Attorney General has more power than Louis XIV had in France, right? It's ridiculous. So much power. He has more power, or she has more power in this case, than the entire government. Yes, we really have, in every country you have a pendulum between the executive branch and the judiciary, and sometimes it goes to this direction and sometimes it goes back to that direction. And always it has, it balances itself out. But in Israel, it's clear the pendulum has swung far, 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 far too much to one side. It needs to swing back a bit. And we have to do that as a country. But I think it's better to do that as a country with a greater consensus. And hopefully we'll be able to do that after the coming election.
Right. But, you say, it could be a decade. Well, it's already been 6 years and you're right. But the question is, what Netanyahu has to do in order to secure this pardon. If he has to say, yes, I'm guilty. If he has to say, no, I'm not going to run again, forget about it. So what are the chances that's going to happen? You think Herzog, who, by the way, once headed the Labor Party and who, by the way, has spent this whole time before the war supposedly mediating between the sides for and against judicial reform. He wasn't mediating. He was on the other side. He was on the side of the leftists, and he was trying to seem like he was mediating. You know what I mean? Like Egypt and Qatar with the war in Gaza, mediating. He was on their side. So you actually believe, and he may have his own political ambitions to get back into politics and not be a ceremonial figure. You really believe that he's going to anger his own base, so to speak, by just saying, okay, I'm going to pardon you. And not with moral turpitude. You don't have to admit guilt. You don't have to, we don't have to have a moral turpitude clause, and you can remain prime minister while there's an election and be reelected. What is the likelihood of that? So my feeling is, something in the end, if Netanyahu doesn't agree to those conditions, we're going to have a whole carry-on all over again. And, I just don't see this leading to that.
It'll be very interesting to see. I mean, a lot of our president's former base are, obviously, you said he was the former leader of the Labour Party, and the Israeli left and the center left are, they've come out, Yesh Atid and the Democratim, they've all come out and they have condemned this. And they're all urging the president, don't agree to a pardon that doesn't demand that he has to leave office, right? That's what they're saying. And it's clear, all along, once again, they see this as a way of getting rid of their strongest political rival, the man who keeps beating them in elections, election after election after election, yes? One can sympathize with their position, maybe, because of that reason, because they can't win as long as Netanyahu is there, maybe. I don't know. But I would say this, and I'd remind you what I said at the beginning. If Herzog goes with his natural base, he's not going to give the pardon. Let's be clear. Or he'll put conditions on the pardon that make it impossible for the prime minister to accept. And that's possible. And once again, we've seen already pressure. We saw 1,000 left-wing academics sign a petition, and we've called the leaders of the former protest movement saying we're going to protest the president. We're not going to let him do this. If he does this, he's not. So there's all sorts of pressure on the president not to go for this. And it'll be interesting what he does, the president. Once again, would Netanyahu have asked for the pardon without having some reason to believe that it was possible? And he knows the politics and he knows the president. The Israeli president I'm talking about here. If we can, though, branch from this to other issues, yesterday the Prime Minister of Israel and the American president spoke on the phone, and Trump invited him to the White House for his 5th White House visit since Trump returned to office, which must be a Guinness World Book of Records, yes? To go back again, no world leader has been at the White House so much since, was the president since Trump got reassumed office in January this year. And one of the critics, and I want to hear you respond to this, yes? One of the critics is because Trump has been so strong in support of Netanyahu on his legal issues, that it's much more difficult for Netanyahu to say no when it comes to crucial Israeli national issues like Gaza, like Syria, like Lebanon, where it's possible there's a divergence of opinion between the United States and Israel. And therefore, because Netanyahu now has this moral obligation to the president who's come to his support on this important legal issue, that could affect the president's ability to get what he wants from Netanyahu at the White House when they meet.
What's ironic about this whole thing? First of all, just as an aside, you mentioned the Guinness Book of World Records. It announced that Israel may not submit entries because, it's an evil occupier and all that. So there goes another one, bites the dust, another disgusting anti-Israel organization, as far as I'm concerned. So they can go to hell. But that's just in parentheses. It's interesting how the Israeli left just has been praising Trump to the skies in order to put down Netanyahu, claiming that Trump is responsible for the return of hostages and the ceasefire, et cetera, et cetera. But now the Israeli left is annoyed at Trump for requesting the pardon, claiming that he shouldn't interfere in our affairs. Now, the Israeli left has no problem with the U.S. interfering in Israeli affairs when it goes their way. That's number one. Number two, a left-wing American publication was responsible for publishing, Barak Ravid. He gets leaks from the U.S. administration, and I can imagine which section of the American administration leaks to him all kinds of stuff, either for purposeful misinformation or because they're the members of an administration who are not on Trump's side, claiming that Trump is really pissed off at Netanyahu because of Israeli operations in Syria, and is telling him, don't screw up my peace deal with Ashara. Okay. Now it's possible that that's all false, and that those people are assuming that the reason Trump invited Netanyahu to the White House for his 5th visit is to give him a dressing down about his military operations because, Trump just wants to see peace busting out all over. And what can we do? We're fighting terrorists who have no intention of peace with Israel or any kind of normalization. Now, it's possible that that's all baloney and that actually Trump and Netanyahu are in lockstep and they're playing kind of good cop, bad cop, and they're in lockstep over Syria, Lebanon, Gaza. We don't know, okay? We don't know what's the case. But so far, we have seen that they usually are more on one another's side than not. So don't be too hasty to imagine that when Netanyahu gets there, he's going to be yelled at over attacks in Syria that are well-deserved because they are against, we have to defend ourselves. And especially since October 7th, we cannot allow any more terrorists to be posing a danger to us along our borders.
So, of course, that's true. We can't allow terrorists to be across our borders planning their next attack against us. And it doesn't matter if it's from Gaza or from Syria or from Lebanon. That has to be an Israeli red line, and we can't cross that. That's clear. They can't cross that, I should say. I want to just strengthen one thing you say before I go into the substance of what you've just said. You talked about how the Israeli anti-Netanyahu forces love it when an American president interferes on their behalf. And let's be clear, the best example, which you forgot to say, but you know as well as I do, is, of course, they used to have these signs, Biden save us, during the judicial reforms. And they were actually inviting the president to become more involved. They were demanding that he become more involved in Israeli internal politics. So you're right, there's a lot of hypocrisy here. When it suits them, they love American involvement, and when it doesn't suit them, they become masters of Israeli sovereignty. They're guarantors, the fighters. Stay out of our business, yes? You can only do it when it helps our side and not the other way around. Though, to be fair, maybe the right is guilty of the same thing. I don't know. We'll discuss that on another time. I liked what you said about good cop, bad cop. It's optimistic. I hope it's true that there's good coordination between Netanyahu and Trump, and they just try. Netanyahu has the job of being the bad cop, the guy who pulls the trigger and takes out the bad guys, and Trump is the guy that's going to negotiate the deal. And I hope it's true. But on the face of it, yes, as we move forward now in Gaza, will there be a divergence? To what extent, Israel is going to insist nothing happens until the two final deceased hostages are returned. Nothing will happen in stage 2 until Hamas actually disarms, that all of Gaza has to be demilitarized. These are Israeli red lines. The United States is theoretically committed to all these things. Will Trump actually demand that these things happen? Will he put the necessary pressure on the Arab countries, on Turkey, on Qatar, to put that pressure on to make sure Hamas follows through on its promises? And if they don't follow through, will he give Israel a green light to start attacking Hamas again? And once again, I think I know what's going to happen, but I'm not sure I know what's going to happen. On Lebanon, it's the same thing. The Lebanese government promised that Hezbollah would be disarmed. They made that promise to the United States. They made that promise to Israel. They made that promise to the whole international community and to their own people. And so far, more than a year after that ceasefire agreement was reached, they haven't done it. And Israel might have to act militarily to put more pressure on, to get the job done, so to speak. Where will America stand on that? Now, I hope they stand with us. I'm pretty sure they stand with us, but there could be a divergence there. And with Syria, let's be frank, the president of the United States hosts the interim president of Syria in the White House. He gives him some aftershave and gives the wife perfume. He's very warm body language. Just this week, we had Israeli soldiers under fire in Syria from radical Islamist elements. The Syrian president is a former jihadist. We don't have to go into that. We've discussed it at length in the past. But is it possible that the American president is trusting the new Syrian leader much more than Israel is? Or is it, as you said, just good cop, bad cop?
Look, I'm sure that President Trump has wishful thinking about the Middle East because he's transactional and he likes to make deals, and he wants to be the big peacemaker. And that's a fine goal. I don't have a problem with that if you're being realistic about the Middle East. Do we know whether President Trump, spritzed the Syrian leader with perfume and said, you're a great guy and everything is, wonderful? Does he really believe it? We don't know, but we have seen him praise a lot of dictators and things. And as soon as that person gets out of line, he lets them have it. So we don't know what's going on in his mind. We do know that he does want, or he is maybe prematurely predicting all this peace, when in fact, there's more war on the horizon because Iran apparently is still, arming groups. We see Houthis who have also been building up power in Syria. And then there's Lebanon, that Hezbollah has no intention of going anywhere anytime soon. And in Gaza, Hamas is refusing to disarm. And so the United States, rather than saying, okay, well, we're going to have to resume the war, it's saying, well, maybe we should split Gaza in half and we give Hamas one half and the other half is Israeli. I mean, bad signs for this. So I really believe that more wars on the horizon, or you could say, kind of wars of attrition, smaller wars of attrition, not a major war like we saw after October 7th. I don't know. And I don't know what's going on in Trump's mind, but I do know one thing. If the left continues to go too far, and if the judicial system continues to show itself as the corrupt, horrible body, many parts of it, the top brass of the army, the top brass of the police, the attorney general's office, the state attorney's office, the Supreme Court, if they're not shown up, what's going to happen is Netanyahu will win even more seats in the next election, which could be, even if it's held when it's supposed to be held, that's a year from now. And it's probably going to be held sooner than that. But the fact is, we're entering an election year one way or another. And if they keep that up, they think they're going to get him out of office. They're more likely to earn him more mandates.
So we'll follow very closely this coming meeting between Trump and Netanyahu. And what you said about Israel, I want to stress something. And I think you'll correct me if I'm wrong. I think I'm speaking for you too. We want to see a strong and independent judiciary in Israel, right? We want that. We understand that that's crucial for Israeli democracy. We believe in the rule of law. What has happened, though, with the pendulum swinging so much in one side, is that there's no balance, no logical balance between the branches of the elected government, that's the Knesset and the cabinet, and on the other side, the judiciary. And the idea that we need judicial reform is crucial for strengthening Israeli democracy. So I want to, when we say that we're upset with the decisions by the Supreme Court, which have exceeded their authority, it's not we're against the principle. We're saying you are doing something that is out of touch with what democracy is really about. Everyone, if the members of parliament, if the members of the government, if the prime minister himself must follow the law, you must follow the law too. And if there's wrongdoing on your side, you shouldn't be covering it up. You should be acting aggressively to clean your house. And the people, if you don't do it yourselves, the people of Israel will demand you do it anyway. And Ruthie, we're coming to the end of our time. So do you have a last word?
Yes. Well, what I'd like to say is it's right. You talk about a pendulum. Excuse me, in the 90s, Supreme Court Justice Aaron Barak grabbed power. It wasn't a pendulum. He grabbed power. He acknowledged doing it. Since then, these judges have said basically that the people are stupid. They don't know. They vote. They're stupid. We know better. It's up to our discretion to override the Knesset when we feel it's necessary. They've made no bones about it. This wasn't a pendulum. A pendulum happens here politically, yes. It happens in all countries. Sometimes this goes too far. Sometimes that goes too far. In this case, it wasn't even a pendulum. It was a power grab, a serious power grab, and not even hidden, because these robed elites actually believe that the public needs to be educated by them. And so the Knesset, which is elected by the public, really is just a bunch of baboons who don't know what they're doing. That's what's so appalling about this. That's why we need reform. It's not enough to have the pendulum swing back. It's not enough.
So I just say in conclusion, I want if there are any left of center viewers and listeners who like to watch our show because they like to hate what we say, and I'm sure there are some people like that, I'd remind them that in favor of judicial reform are people like Daniel Friedman, who was Ehud Olmert's Minister of Justice, people like Chaim Ramon, a former senior Labour member of Parliament and politician, someone like Amnon Rubinstein, who I mentioned before, a leader of Meretz, who spoke out against the power of the Attorney General of Israel, the supreme power, the unquestioned power. And so the idea that this is a left or right issue, it's become one. But anyone interested in the future of Israeli democracy should be asking some very serious questions about judicial overreach in Israel. But we have to finish. I'm looking at the clock, Ruthie. We're over time. We have to finish. We'll continue this discussion next week when you will be here in Jerusalem with me in the studio. Until then, Ruthie, I'll see you.
Looking forward to it, Mark.